When I heard that simple woman ask, "Can I fix something for a meal?" at the hospital, I had no idea she was about to become the most extraordinary person I would ever meet. Rain fell like needles against the hospital windows, each drop a tiny hammer beating the rhythm of the chaos unfolding inside. Dr. Michael Reed was in the eye of the hurricane, his white coat a flag of surrender in a war he was losing. "Explain this to me again, he demanded, the phone pressed so hard against his ear it left marks. How do 7 different medical systems fail simultaneously? On the other end of the line, the technical support manager stammered about unprecedented system-wide anomalies. Michael didn't need technical jargon, he needed working equipment. In the ICU behind him, 8 critical patients depended on machines that were now betraying them. Dr. Reed, Nurse Amelia Carter rushed toward him, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. Bed 4, pediatric patient. Ventilator failure. Oxygen saturation dropping to 82%. Michael's blood ran cold. Bed 4 was Sarah, a 7-year-old girl with pneumonia so severe she couldn't breathe on her own. Without that ventilator. Where are the biomedical technicians? They're here, but they're baffled. They've never seen failures like this across multiple manufacturers. The ICU had become a symphony of alarms, heart monitors beeping false arrhythmias, ventilators cycling erratically, infusion pumps administering medication in dangerous spurts. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was lethal. That's when she appeared. A woman paused at the ICU entrance, looking completely out of place. Her clothes were worn but clean, a simple jacket over faded jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held an intensity that didn't match her humble appearance. "Excuse me, she said, her voice calm amid the chaos. Nurse Carter automatically moved to block her path. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. Family members need." "I'm not family, the woman gently interrupted. "I heard you having equipment troubles. I might be able to help." Dr. Reed turned, his patience at its limit. "Ma'am, we appreciate the concern, but these are highly specialized medical systems. Our technicians, your technicians haven't fixed it in 2 hours, she said, her gaze sweeping the room with disturbing precision. "And from what I hear, you don't have 2 hours to waste." A young intern laughed dismissively. "And you think you can fix what certified biomedical engineers can't?" The woman's eyes met his without blinking. "I can try. In exchange for a meal." The laugh that escaped the intern was sharp and scornful. "A meal? These systems cost hundreds of thousands each. This isn't about food, I understand, she said, her voice maintaining its strange calm. "But you have an emergency, and I have skills. I'm just asking for a sandwich in return." Nurse Carter was about to call security when Sarah's monitor screamed another warning. 79% oxygen saturation. The child was turning blue. "Dr. Reed, said the bedside nurse urgently, "she's crashing. We need stable oxygenation now." The decision hung in the air like a physical weight. Michael looked at the mysterious woman, then at the dying child. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elizabeth, she said simply. "Elizabeth what?" "Just Elizabeth." Michael made a choice that would change everything. "Elizabeth, you have 2 minutes to convince me you understand medical equipment. Because if you're lying, a child will die during this conversation." She nodded and approached the faulty ventilator. Without touching anything, she studied the displays, listened to its mechanical breathing, observed the patterns of its failure. The problem isn't mechanical, she said after 30 seconds of intense observation. It's in the calibration software. The pressure sensor is sending corrupted data to the central processor, making the machine adjust oxygenation based on false readings. Dr. Reed felt the first hints of something he hadn't felt all day: hope. How can you know that just by looking? The oscillation pattern. 40 to 90% is a random failure. It's systematic response to corrupted input. The sensor works, but the interpretation algorithm is processing data incorrectly. Nurse Carter exchanged glances with Michael. This wasn't layperson's talk. And you know how to fix it? Michael asked. I need to access the diagnostic system. It's a basic parameter reset, but it has to be done in the correct sequence, or I could permanently damage the equipment. Michael looked at Sarah. 77% saturation. Minutes from critical failure. If I'm wrong, you're in the same situation you're already in, Elizabeth said calmly. But if I'm right, I can stabilize this ventilator in 5 minutes, and the other equipment? Elizabeth scanned the ICU. If it's what I think, they all have the same root problem. I fix one. I teach you how to fix the others. Michael took a deep breath, feeling as if it were his first breath of the day. Amelia, bring her food from the cafeteria. Elizabeth, he hesitated, still not believing what he was doing. You have 5 minutes to prove you're not crazy. As Elizabeth began working on the ventilator's control panel, her hands moved with surgical precision through digital menus that normally only specialized technicians accessed. How do you know where to find these functions? Dr. Reed asked, his suspicion competing with growing curiosity. Experience, she replied without looking up. What kind of experience? She paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. I've worked with this ventilator model before. Where? In various places. The evasive answer raised more questions, but before they could press further, Elizabeth announced, done. Check the readings. Dr. Reed looked at Sarah's monitor. The saturation had stabilized at 95% and held steady. The ventilator was working perfectly. My God, he murmured. How did you do that? Reset the calibration protocol and reconfigure the safety parameters. The problem was exactly what I thought. Nurse Carter returned with a tray from the cafeteria. I brought a full lunch, sandwich, soup, salad. Elizabeth looked at the food as if it were the most precious thing she'd ever seen. Thank you so much. Wait, Michael interrupted. You said the other equipment has the same problem? Elizabeth scanned the ICU. I can check, but probably yes. If everything failed simultaneously, there's a common cause, then fix them all. Please. Elizabeth picked up a fork and ate a few bites before responding. I can try. But I'll need more food later. This work will take hours. Michael nodded vigorously. All the food you want. What none of them knew was that Elizabeth wasn't a simple woman offering amateur help. She was Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, former brilliant biomedical engineer who had developed revolutionary medical monitoring systems before losing everything for trying to do the right thing. And the man who had destroyed her life was about to discover that the woman he had silenced was now the only person capable of saving what mattered most to him in the world. As Elizabeth worked, I began to understand that this simple woman carried secrets that could shape the foundations of modern medicine. The following hours transformed the ICU into a theater of technical miracles. Elizabeth moved from equipment to equipment with a fluency that left the biomed technicians watching with a mixture of admiration and shame. Her hands, which had trembled slightly when she arrived, were now instruments of absolute precision. Cardiac monitor in bed 6 stabilized, she announced, finishing the third device. The arrhythmia detection algorithm was interpreting normal beats as irregular. Dr. Reed watched every movement with growing fascination. "How do you know these systems so intimately?" "I studied a lot, she replied, her eyes fixed on a ventilator display. "Where did you study?" "MIT. Biomedical engineering." The answer echoed through the ICU like thunder. Amelia nearly dropped the tray of food she was bringing Elizabeth. "MIT?" Dr. Reed repeated, incredulous. "And where did you work after that?" Elizabeth paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Meditech Global. I was vice president of innovation." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sounds of equipment now functioning perfectly. Meditech Global was one of the world's largest medical equipment manufacturers, and the company responsible for maintaining half the hospital's equipment. "Why did you leave Meditech?" Amelia asked, her voice soft but persistent. Elizabeth finished adjusting the fourth device before answering. When she finally turned, her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "Because I discovered they were selling equipment with known software defects. Defects that could kill patients." Dr. Reed felt the floor vanish beneath his feet. "Known defects, and when I tried to report it, Elizabeth continued, her voice growing firmer, "they destroyed me. Sued me for breach of confidentiality, spread rumors that I was mentally unstable, and made sure no company in the industry would ever hire me again." Amelia brought her hand to her mouth. "My God. And today all the equipment failed simultaneously, Elizabeth completed. "It's no coincidence. Someone remotely activated the defects I reported 3 years ago." As she spoke, a flashback invaded Dr. Reed's mind, a memory from 2 years ago, when the hospital signed the multi-million-dollar contract with Meditech. The man who had most strongly advocated for the deal, Administrative Director Robert Caldwell, had insisted Meditech was the most reliable company in the market. "Elizabeth, Dr. Reed said carefully, who specifically approved the Meditech contract at this hospital. It was a board decision." But Michael stopped, a dangerous connection forming in his mind. Robert Caldwell was Meditech's biggest advocate. He said he knew the CEO personally. Elizabeth closed her eyes for a moment. "Robert Caldwell isn't just this hospital's administrative director." "What do you mean?" "He's the silent majority shareholder of Meditech Global. And he's the one who orchestrated my destruction when I tried to report the defects." The revelation hit the ICU like a silent explosion. Robert Caldwell, the respected man who cut inauguration ribbons and gave interviews about medical ethics, was the architect of this entire tragedy. At that moment, Dr. Reed's phone rang. The name on the screen made his stomach churn, Robert Caldwell. "Hello, Robert." "Michael, I heard you're having equipment problems." "What a shame. Have you called Meditech's technicians yet?" Dr. Reed looked at Elizabeth, who was listening to the conversation with a grim expression. "Yes, they're working on the problem." "Great. I'm sure they'll fix it quickly." Meditech has the best technicians in the business. Elizabeth grabbed a piece of paper and wrote rapidly, "He's testing whether you let me touch the equipment." "Say no." "No, of course not, Dr. Reed lied. "Only authorized technicians have access." "Perfect. Well, I'll stop by later to check if everything's resolved. Bye." When Dr. Reed hung up, Elizabeth was trembling slightly. "He knows, she said. "Robert knows I'm here." "How could he know?" "Because today's failures weren't random. They were activated remotely to force me to appear. He's been hunting me for 3 years." Amelia approached. "Elizabeth, why would he do that?" "Because as long as I'm alive, I'm a threat. I have evidence that could destroy Meditech and send Robert to prison." But more importantly, Elizabeth looked at Sarah, now breathing peacefully in bed. "I know how he thinks. And I know this isn't over." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth checked the other equipment she had fixed. Everything worked perfectly. "He won't stop until he finds me. And now that he knows I'm here, he'll do something desperate." "Like what?" "Like activate more severe failures. Failures even I can't fix in time." As if her words were prophetic, at that moment the hospital's general alarm began to sound. A voice echoed through the loudspeakers, "Code Blue in Pediatric ICU. Code Blue in Pediatric ICU. Critical failure in life support equipment." Elizabeth closed her eyes. "It's begun." Dr. Reed ran to the phone. "Pediatric ICU, this is Dr. Reed." "What's the situation, doctor?" "It's a catastrophe. All equipment in the pediatric wing stopped simultaneously. We have 12 children in critical condition and no functioning equipment." Elizabeth stood up, her expression shifting to something Dr. Reed couldn't define, determination mixed with what seemed like profound resignation. "Dr. Reed, she said, her voice now carrying an authority she hadn't demonstrated before. "If we want to save those children, we'll have to stop Robert before he kills someone to silence me." "How?" Elizabeth smiled for the first time since she arrived, a smile mixing sadness with relentless determination. "By giving him exactly what he wants. A chance to destroy me publicly, in front of the entire medical staff." She paused dramatically. "But this time, I have the evidence that will destroy him first." As they ran toward the pediatric ICU, a flashback invaded Elizabeth's mind, herself, 3 years younger, in a Meditech executive boardroom, showing Robert Caldwell the data proving the fatal defects. He had laughed, calling her concerns perfectionist hysteria. Now, she thought as the elevators descended, that same hysteria will save the lives of innocent children, including, ironically, Robert's own granddaughter, who was among the patients in the pediatric ICU. The circle was closing, and Elizabeth Shaw was about to prove that truth, no matter how long silenced, always finds a way to win. The rush to the pediatric ICU showed me that Elizabeth wasn't just an engineering genius, she was a moral strategist facing the ultimate dilemma. The hospital corridors transformed into tunnels of despair. Dr. Reed, Elizabeth, and Amelia ran down the stairs, the sound of alarms echoing like modern war sirens. Each descending step took them deeper into the nightmare Robert Caldwell had architected. When they reached the pediatric ICU, the scene was a materialized nightmare. 12 beds, 12 children between 3 and 10 years old, all connected to equipment flashing red lights of agony. The air smelled of fear and powerlessness. Dr. Reed, Dr. Paula Silva, head of pediatrics, ran toward him with red-rimmed eyes. Everything stopped 8 minutes ago. Ventilators, monitors, infusion pumps, complete failure. Elizabeth scanned the room with expert eyes, but Dr. Reed noticed something strange. Her face lost all color when her gaze landed on bed 7. Bed 7, Elizabeth whispered. It's her. Dr. Reed followed her gaze. In bed 7 lay Lily Caldwell, Robert's 5-year-old granddaughter, recovering from a complicated appendectomy. The girl had the same green eyes as her grandfather, now closed in medicated sleep. Lily Caldwell, Amelia confirmed quietly. Robert brought her personally yesterday. Said he'd only trust our pediatric ICU. Elizabeth approached the first ventilator with slow, almost reverent movements. Her hands, once steady, trembled visibly. These aren't the same problems as the adult ICU, she said, her voice hoarse. Those were configuration failures. Here they were shut down remotely. Shut down? Dr. Reed repeated, horrified. How is that possible? All modern equipment has remote access for monitoring. Someone with the right credentials. Elizabeth didn't need to finish. Amelia pointed to the other children. Dr. Reed, look at the other beds. Dr. Reed scanned the room and felt a new wave of nausea. Bed 3, son of the prosecutor who dismissed Elizabeth's case. Bed 5, daughter of the journalist who wrote defamatory articles about her. Bed 9, grandson of the judge who rejected her evidence. He's not just trying to kill you, Dr. Reed suddenly understood. He's trying to break you, forcing you to choose which children to save first. Elizabeth closed her eyes, and for a moment, Dr. Reed saw all the pain of the last 3 years on her face. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for a dive into deep waters. 3 years earlier, Meditech conference room. Elizabeth, in an impeccable pantsuit, presented data on a large screen. Tests show critical failure in the oxygenation algorithm. We could kill patients, Robert. Robert Caldwell laughed, waving dismissively. Elizabeth, dear, perfection is the enemy of profit. The margin of error is acceptable. Acceptable, she repeated, incredulous. We're talking about human lives. We're talking about business, he corrected, his voice becoming dangerously soft. And you're going to learn the difference. Back in the pediatric ICU, Elizabeth opened her eyes, and something had changed. The doubt had vanished, replaced by terrifying clarity. Dr. Silva, she said, her voice now crystalline, how many minutes do we have? Depending on the child, between 5 and 15. Lily might have less, she's the most critical. Elizabeth moved to the nearest equipment, not Lily's, but bed 3's, the prosecutor's son. What are you doing? Amelia asked, confused. Lily has the least time. Exactly, Elizabeth replied as her hands began working with supernatural speed. Robert expects me to save Lily first. To prove I'm better than him by saving his granddaughter. She fixed the first ventilator in 90 seconds, immediately moving to the next. But doing what he expects, Elizabeth continued, would confirm this is a game between us. And it's not. She looked at all 12 children. It's about them. All equally important. Dr. Reed watched, marveling, as Elizabeth worked with brutal efficiency. She wasn't choosing based on revenge or forgiveness, She was saving according to medical criticality, exactly as any ethical professional would. Bed 3 equipment stabilized, she announced. Moving to bed 5. Elizabeth, Dr. Reed said softly, Lily. Lily will be 7th, Elizabeth replied without hesitation. Not because she's Robert's granddaughter, but because 6 other children are at equal or greater risk. In his pocket, Dr. Reed's phone vibrated. A message from Robert Caldwell, on my way. Hope everything is under control. Elizabeth read the message over Dr. Reed's shoulder and smiled, a sad but resolute smile. He's coming, she said. Perfect. Why perfect? Because when he arrives, I'll be at bed 6, saving the grandson of the judge he bribed. And he'll have to watch while I save all the children he tried to use as pawns. As Elizabeth worked on the 4th equipment, a second flashback invaded her mind. 2 years ago, Robert Caldwell's office. You destroyed my life, Elizabeth said, her hands shaking with rage. People will die because of this equipment. Robert smiled, a predator's smile. People always die, dear. The trick is to make sure it's not our fault. At least not provably. Minute 12 of the rescue. Elizabeth stabilized the 5th piece of equipment and moved to the 6th, the judge's grandson. Her hands no longer trembled. Each child saved was redemption, not just for her, but for the entire system that had failed to protect them. Dr. Reed, she said while working, when Robert arrives, I need you to do exactly as I say. What are you planning? A different kind of sabotage, Elizabeth replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'm going to sabotage his certainty that everyone has a price. I'm going to sabotage his faith in human corruption. She finished the 6th equipment and finally moved toward Lily Caldwell. The girl was pale, her saturation dropping dangerously. Elizabeth, Amelia whispered, are you really going to save her? After everything he did? Elizabeth placed her hands on Lily's ventilator, her fingers moving with surprising tenderness. Amelia, she said softly, the greatest sabotage we can commit against evil is to refuse to mirror it. The sound of the ICU door opening echoed through the room. Robert Caldwell stood in the entrance, his impeccable suit and confident expression brutally contrasting with the chaos he'd created. His eyes met Elizabeth's, and for the first time, Dr. Reed saw something beyond arrogance in the man's face. He saw doubt. Elizabeth didn't look at him. Her hands continued working on Lily's equipment, each movement an act of silent defiance. And on the display above the girl's head, the numbers began to climb. 85%, 88%, 92%. Redemption was happening, not as a triumph, but as a simple act of care. And Robert Caldwell was about to discover that some battles aren't won with power or manipulation, but with the quiet strength of doing the right thing when everything encourages the opposite. The sound of Robert Caldwell's footsteps echoed through the corridor like sentences being pronounced, each beat on the linoleum floor a warning of the approaching confrontation. And I watched, paralyzed, as Elizabeth continued her work of salvation, her hands moving with supernatural calm amid the chaos Robert himself had created. Robert Caldwell stopped at the entrance to the pediatric ICU, his impeccable dark gray suit seeming like armor against the white coat stained with urgency. His eyes, the same emerald green as his granddaughter fighting for her life, fixed on Elizabeth with a mixture of recognition and disdain. Elizabeth Shaw, he said, the name coming out like an accusation. I should have known I'd find you at the center of chaos. Elizabeth didn't even look at him. Her hands continued working on Lily's ventilator, her fingers dancing across the controls with an intimacy only years of experience could explain. Robert, she replied, her voice remarkably steady. I came to fix what you broke. As always. Dr. Reed felt the air grow heavy, charged with years of untold history. Amelia, beside him, discreetly held her phone, recording every word. Fix, Robert laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You always had such a dramatic view of things, Elizabeth. Equipment fails. It's the nature of technology. 7 different pieces of equipment failing simultaneously isn't the nature of technology, Robert, Elizabeth countered, still not looking up. It's sabotage. And we both know who has the credentials to do it. Robert's smile faded slightly. He looked at his granddaughter, whose pale face was beginning to regain some color as the ventilator stabilized. You're touching my granddaughter's equipment, he observed, his voice dangerously soft. After all you've done, you still dare to touch her? Finally, Elizabeth raised her eyes. And what Dr. Reed saw in them wasn't anger or vengeance, but a deep, oceanic sadness. I'm saving your granddaughter, Robert. Something you seem willing to sacrifice to destroy me. The numbers on the monitor above Lily climbed to 95%, and the soft, rhythmic sound of the ventilator became the soundtrack to a silent miracle. Robert seemed to falter for a moment, his unshakable confidence showing its first crack. He looked from Elizabeth to Lily, then to the other children whose equipment she had already fixed. Why? He asked, and for the first time, Dr. Reed heard genuine confusion in his voice. Why would you save my granddaughter after what I did to you? Elizabeth finished the final adjustments on the ventilator and slowly stepped back. Her eyes swept across the ICU, landing on each saved child. Because this was never about you and me, Robert. It was always about them. She pointed to Lily. Your granddaughter isn't guilty of your crimes. None of these children are. She moved to the next piece of equipment, bed 8, where a 4-year-old boy struggled to breathe. You tried to turn this into a battle between us, Elizabeth continued, her hands already working on the new ventilator. You tried to force me to choose between vengeance and redemption. But you forgot one fundamental thing. What? Robert asked, his voice almost a whisper. That some people don't need to choose between doing good and doing right. For us, they're the same thing. Dr. Reed watched Robert Caldwell, the man who always seemed carved from granite, begin to crumble. His shoulders, normally erect with arrogance, slumped slightly. His eyes, always full of calculation, now showed only confusion. All these years, Robert said, I thought you were naive. That your obsession with ethics was just a failure to understand how the world really works. Elizabeth stabilized the 8th piece of equipment and moved to the 9th. Her movements were economical, efficient, each gesture a study in competence. The world you created, Robert, is one where children die from accounting decisions. Where granddaughters are sacrificed for revenge. If that's how the world works, then perhaps the world needs more naive people like me. She worked in silence for a few minutes, fixing the remaining equipment with an efficiency that was almost poetic in its precision. Robert watched, paralyzed, as the woman he had destroyed saved not only his granddaughter, but all the children he had tried to use as weapons against her. When the last piece of equipment was stabilized, Elizabeth finally turned to face him completely. Her face was tired, but her eyes shone with a light Robert had never seen before, the light of someone who chose the hardest path and discovered it was the only one worth taking. "You tried to teach me that power comes from control, Robert, she said softly. But you never understood that real power comes from the ability to heal, not to hurt." Robert looked at his granddaughter, now breathing peacefully, her color gradually returning. He looked at the other children, whose lives had been saved by the woman he considered an enemy. "Elizabeth," he began, but the words seemed to fail him. She took a small flash drive from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. "All the evidence is here, Robert. The defects you covered up. The emails you thought you deleted. The orders you gave to destroy me." Dr. Reed expected her to hand the drive to the authorities, to call the police, to demand justice. Instead, Elizabeth did something nobody expected. She pushed the drive toward Robert. "Take it." Robert looked at the drive as if it were a snake about to strike. "What? Why?" "Because redemption isn't something you demand, Elizabeth explained, her voice heavy with an ancestral sadness. "It's something you choose. And today, you have a choice to make." "What choice?" "To continue being the man who destroys, or to become the man who rebuilds. The evidence is the same. What changes is what you decide to do with it." Robert Caldwell, the man who built an empire on corruption and lies, looked at the flash drive, then at his granddaughter, then into the eyes of the woman he had most underestimated in the world. And for the first time in 20 years, he didn't see an adversary or a threat. He saw a mirror showing the man he could have been, and perhaps still could become. The hands he extended to take the drive trembled not from fear, but from something Robert had long forgotten: hope. I witnessed the exact moment Robert Caldwell's empire began to crumble, not from an external attack, but from the simple courage of a woman who refused to mirror his wickedness. The silence in the pediatric ICU was so profound that the soft sound of functioning ventilators seemed like a hymn of redemption. Robert Caldwell held the flash drive as if it were both a treasure and a death sentence. His fingers, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, trembled around the small device containing all the truth he had spent years burying. "Why?" he asked again, his voice broken. "Why would you give me a choice after everything I've done?" Elizabeth watched him with an expression that wasn't forgiveness, it was something deeper, more complex. It was understanding. "Because the system you corrupted won't be fixed by your destruction, Robert, she explained calmly. It will be fixed when you decide to fix it." Dr. Reed felt as if he were witnessing something sacred. Amelia still held her phone, but now not as a weapon, but as a document of an ethical miracle. Robert looked at his granddaughter Lily, whose soft, regular breathing was living testimony to Elizabeth's work. His eyes moved over the other beds, each saved child representing a flaw in his calculation that everyone had a price. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely lost. Elizabeth approached slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "I want you to use your power for good, rather than profit. I want you to expose the entire corruption network at Meditech, not just your own involvement." Robert laughed bitterly. "That would destroy the company. Hundreds would lose their jobs." "And how many have lost their lives?" Elizabeth countered softly. How many families have grieved because you chose to protect the balance sheet instead of patience? The question hung in the air like a ghost finally named. Robert closed his eyes, and Dr. Reed could see the weight of years of wrong decisions descending on his shoulders. If I do this, Robert whispered, I'll go to prison. Lily will grow up knowing her grandfather is a criminal. Or she'll grow up knowing that her grandfather, when confronted with the truth, chose to do the right thing, Elizabeth corrected. That he valued her life and other children's lives more than his own freedom. As they spoke, Robert's phone buzzed insistently. He looked at the screen. It was his lawyer. For a moment, his face hardened, and Dr. Reed could see the old man trying to return. The familiar cost-benefit calculation, the familiar dance of power and manipulation. Then his eyes found Lily's again. He declined the call. What needs to happen? Robert asked, his voice now clear and decided. Elizabeth smiled, a sad but hopeful smile. First, you'll call the Meditech board and reveal everything. In front of witnesses. Second, you'll provide all evidence to the authorities. Third, you'll help create a new ethical verification system for medical equipment. Robert nodded slowly, as if each movement required monumental effort. And Lily, he asked, his voice breaking. Lily will know that her grandfather loved her enough to become a better man because of her, Elizabeth said softly. Dr. Reed watched, amazed, as Robert Caldwell, the man he knew as a ruthless corporate titan, pulled a laptop from his briefcase and began making calls. Not the calls of a man trying to escape, but those of a man accepting his consequences. Jonathan, Robert said to the Meditech board chairman, I need you to gather the executive board. Yes, now. I have something to confess. As Robert spoke, revealing years of corruption and cover-ups, Elizabeth worked quietly on the equipment, making final adjustments. Her hands, which had trembled with hunger hours before, now moved with the quiet authority of someone who had regained not just her dignity, but her purpose. Dr. Reed approached her. Did you know he would make the right choice? Elizabeth looked at Robert, who was now speaking with a federal prosecutor, his voice firm but filled with a strange peace. I believed he had the capacity, she corrected. The choice had to be his. In 30 minutes that felt simultaneously like an eternity and the blink of an eye, Robert Caldwell had revealed the complete corruption network at Meditech to his board, called the Attorney General to schedule a plea bargain meeting, ordered the immediate recall of all defective equipment, offered his personal fortune to create a victim compensation fund. When he finally hung up, Robert looked 10 years older, but also, paradoxically, more at peace than Dr. Reed had ever seen him. It's done, he said simply. Elizabeth nodded. Now comes the hard part. What could be harder than this? Living with your choices, she replied. And helping rebuild what you destroyed. Robert walked to Lily's bed and took his granddaughter's small hand. The tears he had held back for years finally fell silently. She will be the first to know the truth, he promised. And the last to suffer for it. As federal agents arrived to take Robert away, he asked Elizabeth one final question. Why did you do all this? Why not just destroy me when you had the chance? Elizabeth looked at the saved children, then at the hands that had repaired not just equipment, but destinies. Because the true measure of our character isn't how we treat those who can help us, but how we treat those who tried to destroy us. Robert nodded, a final understanding shining in his eyes. So this was never about revenge. Never, Elizabeth confirmed. It was always about healing. And the person who needed healing most was you. When Robert left with the agents, his head was raised not with arrogance, but with acceptance. And Dr. Reed understood that he had witnessed something very rare, not the fall of a powerful man, but his redemption. Elizabeth remained in the ICU, her hands now empty, her work complete. But Dr. Reed knew that the real work, the work of rebuilding a broken system, was just beginning. And for the first time, he believed that perhaps, just perhaps, healing was possible. 6 months later, I watched the woman who had asked for food become the architect of a quiet revolution in medicine, and witnessed how the seeds planted in that ICU began to bloom in ways none of us could have imagined. The auditorium at the Ministry of Health was packed, but the silence was absolute. Elizabeth Shaw, now wearing a simple navy blue dress instead of the worn clothes from months before, stood on the stage, her face illuminated by the spotlights that had once blinded her with their cruel glare. Today I'm not here as a victim or a heroine, she began, her voice echoing through the room filled with doctors, politicians, and journalists. I'm here as a witness that a single act of courage can trigger a wave of change that saves thousands of lives. Dr. Reed watched from the front row, proud and still somewhat surprised by the speed of the transformation. The fall of Meditech had become the catalyst for the largest medical safety reform in the country's history. On the screen behind Elizabeth, numbers began to appear: 847 defective equipment units identified, 23 executives arrested, $1.2 billion in compensation, and the number that mattered most, 314 lives saved by immediate recalls. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Elizabeth continued. The real story is in the people who refuse to remain silent. In the professionals who chose ethics over convenience. Then she did something nobody expected. She called Robert Caldwell to the stage. Robert entered, accompanied by 2 guards, his handcuffs removed for the occasion. He looked older, but also lighter, as if freed from a weight he'd carried for decades. This man, Elizabeth said, her voice free of judgment, had every opportunity to continue down the path of corruption. Instead, he chose redemption. Robert approached the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. For years, I believed power came from control and wealth, he began, his voice softer than Dr. Reed had ever heard it. But I've learned that true power comes from the ability to admit when we're wrong and the courage to fix our mistakes. He looked at Elizabeth, and for the first time, there was no bitterness or competition in his gaze, only gratitude. Elizabeth Shaw didn't save me from prison. She saved me from myself. And in doing so, she potentially saved thousands of patients who would have died because of my greed. The silence in the auditorium was so profound you could hear the hum of the projectors. My sentence begins next week, Robert continued. But before that, I want to announce that my entire fortune, all $850 million, will be used to create the Shoreed Foundation for Medical Ethics. Dr. Reed sat back suddenly, as if punched. His name? On the foundation? Elizabeth smiled at him, her eyes shining. Dr. Michael Reed was the first person to give me a chance when I needed it most. He gave me not just food, but the opportunity to regain my purpose. As the auditorium erupted in applause, Dr. Reed thought of that chaotic day in the ICU, of the hungry woman offering help, of the instinctive decision that changed everything. He'd never imagined that simple yes would lead to this. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Elizabeth returned to the microphone. And there's one more person I'd like to introduce. A 5-year-old girl walked onto the stage, holding a social worker's hand. It was Lily Caldwell, now fully recovered, her green eyes shining under the lights. Lily, Elizabeth said, kneeling to meet the girl's height. Do you know why your grandfather isn't home with you right now? Lily shook her head, serious. Because he's helping make sure other children like you stay safe in hospitals. Sometimes doing the right thing means making hard choices. Lily looked at her grandfather, then at Elizabeth. Is Grandpa a hero? Robert choked up, tears streaming down his face. Elizabeth smiled. Yes, sweetheart. In a very important way, he is. As the press conference continued, Dr. Reed thought of the seeds planted in that ICU, not just the lives saved that day, but the thousands that would be saved in the future by the foundation, the new protocols, the culture of ethics born from the scandal's ashes. Later, in the lobby, Elizabeth approached him. Surprised, she asked, her smile still carrying echoes of the hungry woman he'd met. I'm surprised you included me in this, he admitted. All I did was believe in you when no one else would. And that, Michael, she said softly, is everything. Sometimes believing in someone is the greatest act of courage we can have. She handed him a folder. Inside were plans for the Foundation's first project, a training program for young people from underserved communities interested in biomedical engineering. The Lily program, Dr. Reed read, moved. You named it after her. Because every child deserves a world where medical technology is a tool for healing, not danger. As they discussed the details, Robert Caldwell approached, his guards maintaining a respectful distance. Elizabeth, he said, his voice thick with emotion, thank you. For everything. She looked at him, and Dr. Reed saw something extraordinary. There wasn't complete forgiveness, for some wounds take time to heal, but there was space for healing to begin. You did the right thing, Robert, she said. And that's a beginning. That night, as Dr. Reed returned to the hospital that now housed the first Shoreed Foundation laboratory, he thought of the extraordinary journey that began with a simple request for food. The seeds planted that day of chaos now bloomed into a garden of hope, not just for Elizabeth or Robert, but for countless patients who would never know their lives were saved by a courageous woman and a man who learned to be better. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth, that the greatest hunger isn't for food, but for purpose, and that even the smallest seeds of integrity can grow to transform the world. 1 year after that historic press conference, I witnessed the impossible. The medical system that once protected the corrupt had become a beacon of integrity, and the man who started it all watched from a prison cell, proud of his new legacy. The Shoreed Foundation laboratory at General Hospital looked more like a cutting-edge tech studio than a medical unit. Monitors showed real-time data from equipment in 12 countries, and young engineering students, many from underprivileged communities, worked alongside veteran physicians. Elizabeth watched from a control room, her face illuminated by screens showing statistics she'd never imagined possible. 94% reduction in equipment failures at hospitals adopting her protocols, 47 documented lives saved just last week thanks to new early warning systems. Dr. Shaw, a young engineer named Sophia approached, her accent from Sao Paulo's outskirts brimming with excitement. The monitoring system at Hospital das Clínicas just detected an anomaly that would have caused catastrophic failure in 2 hours. We prevented it. Elizabeth smiled, remembering when she was the only one detecting those anomalies, with no one to listen. How many people were at risk, Sophia? 8 patients in the cardiac ICU, including a 6-year-old child. Dr. Reed entered the room, carrying 2 tablets with updated data. Elizabeth, we just received confirmation. The Senate approved the Medical Safety Act. Your protocols are now mandatory nationwide. What began as a scandal had become legislation. What was born from a hungry woman's desperation now protected millions. But the most moving scene unfolded on a video screen on the wall, a live feed from the medium security prison where Robert Caldwell served his 15-year sentence. Robert was in his cell, surrounded by documents and a laptop with supervised internet access. His cell didn't look like a cell, it looked like a remote office, with medical equipment performance charts plastered on the walls. Elizabeth? Michael, Robert's voice echoed through the speakers. We did it. The ethical verification system just went live in India. That's the 47th country. Dr. Reed smiled at the camera. And how's our most dedicated student? The camera showed Robert surrounded by 4 other inmates, all studying biomedical engineering manuals. The Caldwell Redemption Program, as it became known, had turned the wing into a classroom. We're reviewing safety protocols for pediatric ventilators, Robert responded, his face showing a passion he'd never displayed in his CEO days. We found a vulnerability nobody had noticed. Elizabeth watched, amazed. The man who once had defects now hunted them with a convert's zeal. Robert, she said, you have a special visitor today. The laboratory door opened, and Lily Caldwell entered, now 6 years old, wearing a small white coat with the Foundation's logo. She ran to the video screen. Grandpa, I learned about circuits today. Aunt Elizabeth showed me how heart monitors work. Robert's face lit up in a way Dr. Reed had never seen before, a mixture of proud love and profound gratitude. Lily, my dear, he said, his voice soft. Did you enjoy it? I loved it. When I grow up, I'm going to be an engineer like Aunt Elizabeth and a doctor like Dr. Michael. And I'll fix equipment to save children, like you and Aunt Elizabeth do. Robert swallowed hard, his emotions overflowing through the screen. That makes me very happy, dear. Very happy. As Lily chattered about her lessons, Dr. Reed pulled Elizabeth aside. Have you ever stopped to think, he whispered, that if you hadn't shown up that day asking for food, none of this would exist? All these lives saved, this entire system transformed. Elizabeth looked around the laboratory, at the young students with new opportunities, at the data showing lives being saved, at Lily talking with her redeeming grandfather. Michael, she said softly, that wasn't the day I asked for food. It was the day the hospital offered me a second chance. And that made all the difference. On the video screen, Robert finished his conversation with Lily and turned his attention to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I have an important question, he said, his voice serious. The board of the New European Foundation wants to know if we should prioritize developing countries or focus on upgrading existing systems. What's your opinion? Dr. Reed watched, still surprised. as Elizabeth and Robert, the woman he destroyed and the man who tried to destroy her, discussed ethical strategies as dedicated colleagues. Developing countries, Elizabeth answered without hesitation. That's where our protocols can have the most immediate impact. I completely agree, Robert nodded. I'll prepare the documentation. And Elizabeth, thank you for everything. When the call ended, Lily ran to Elizabeth and hugged her legs. "Aunt Elizabeth, Grandpa told me you're the coolest person in the whole world. And that he's really happy to be in prison because now he helps save people instead of hurting them." Elizabeth knelt, her eyes shining with tears. "Your grandfather is a very brave man, Lily. Sometimes it takes great courage to admit we're wrong and start over." Later that evening, as Elizabeth and Dr. Reed reviewed the day's final reports, he asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "Have you completely forgiven Robert?" Elizabeth looked at the photo on the wall of her, Dr. Reed, Robert, and Lily, taken during a supervised prison visit. "Forgiveness isn't a switch you turn on or off, Michael, she reflected. It's a process. And every time I see Robert using his expertise to save lives instead of profiting from death, the process advances a little." "And the hunger?" he asked gently. "Do you still remember what it felt like?" She smiled, a smile full of hard-won peace. "I remember every day. But now it's not a memory of pain, it's a memory of gratitude. Because it taught me that no matter how much we lose, we can always find our purpose again." As they closed the laboratory, Dr. Reed thought about the extraordinary journey, from the crisis in the ICU to this center of excellence, from scandal to redemption, from hunger to abundance. And he understood that the true harvest wasn't in the numbers or statistics, but in the transformed lives, not just the patients saved, but the woman who regained her dignity, the doctor who rediscovered his vocation, and the man who learned that true legacy isn't what we accumulate, but what we give away. 20 years later, I walked through the same corridors of General Hospital, but now they echoed with a story that had become legend, and I witnessed how that simple request for food had saved not just one life, but transformed an entire system of care. General Hospital was no longer just a hospital, it was a sanctuary of ethical innovation. Plaques at the entrance told the story every medical professional now knew. Here, in 2025, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw asked to repair equipment for a meal and started a revolution in global medical safety. Dr. Michael Reed, now with fully gray hair but the same kind eyes, walked slowly down the main corridor. In his hands, he held a tablet showing statistics that still amazed him. The Shoreed Foundation now operated in 134 countries. Its protocols had prevented over 50,000 deaths from equipment failures, and the Caldwell model of corporate ethical reform was studied in business schools worldwide. "Dr. Reed?" The voice was soft, but carried an authority he immediately recognized. He turned and saw Lily Caldwell, no longer the 6-year-old girl, but a 26-year-old woman wearing not just the Foundation's white coat, but also the MIT Biomedical Engineering graduation ring. "Lily, he said, his heart tightening with emotion. "You've returned." "Returned to stay, she replied, hugging him. "I finished my doctorate. And I brought something Aunt Elizabeth needs to see." They walked to the main laboratory, where Elizabeth Shaw, now in her 50s but with the same intensity in her eyes, supervised a team of young engineers from around the world. "Elizabeth, Michael said softly. "We have a visitor." Elizabeth turned, and her face lit up when she saw Lily. The two women embraced, mentor and protege, savior and saved, united by a bond that transcended blood or obligation. "Aunt Elizabeth, Lily said, her hands trembling slightly. "I found something in the original Meditech project archives. Something Grandpa Robert asked me to look for." She placed a tablet on the table. On the screen was a scanned document, a letter handwritten by Robert Caldwell, dated the same day Elizabeth had appeared at the hospital. Elizabeth read in silence, her hands covering her mouth as the words hit her. "My dear Elizabeth, if you're reading this letter, it means I've finally kept my promise. 3 years ago, when you came to me with evidence of the defects, I knew you were right. But fear of losing everything, fear of prison, fear of judgment, paralyzed me. Today, when I activated the failure protocols at the hospital, it wasn't to destroy you. It was to give you a platform. To force a confrontation I knew I'd never have the courage to start willingly. You were always the most ethical person I knew. And I needed you to show me how to become human again. When you read this, I'll be in prison. But know that every day I spend there is worth it, because through my fall, you could build something greater. Take care of Lily, and keep saving the world. With eternal gratitude, Robert." Tears streamed down Elizabeth's face, not tears of sadness, but of final understanding. "He planned everything, she whispered. "From the beginning." Lily nodded, her own eyes shining. "Grandpa told me during our last visit, before he passed. He said you needed a stage large enough for the whole world to hear your message. And he gave it to you." Michael Reed looked at the two women, one who started with nothing, another who inherited a complex legacy, and understood he was witnessing the closing of a circle that transcended generations. "Elizabeth, he said softly, I always wondered why Robert confessed so completely. Now I understand." Elizabeth looked through the laboratory window to the hospital courtyard where a statue of Robert Caldwell now stood, not as a criminal, but as a reformer, with the inscription, "Sometimes the greatest courage lies in admitting we were wrong." He wasn't the villain of my story, she reflected. He was a lost man who used his last strength to give me a ladder when I was at the bottom of the well. Lily took Elizabeth's hand. "And now, Aunt Elizabeth, it's my turn to continue the work." She led them to a conference room where dozens of young engineers and doctors waited. On the wall, a projection showed the Foundation's new project, Global Ethical Monitoring System, a network that would connect all medical equipment worldwide, ensuring no patient would ever face the risks Elizabeth had uncovered. "This is Grandpa Robert's legacy, Lily announced to the room. "And Aunt Elizabeth's. And Dr. Reed's. And everyone who believed a broken system could be fixed." As Lily explained the technical details, Michael whispered to Elizabeth, "Could you ever have imagined, that day, that one simple yes would lead to this?" Elizabeth looked at the crowd of eager young faces, at the technology that would save countless lives, at the woman Lily had become. "Michael, she replied softly, "that day, all I could imagine was my next meal." Sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with grand plans, but with simple needs and basic courage. At the meeting's end, Lily made a final announcement. "And I have personal news, she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm pregnant. And if it's a girl, her name will be Elizabeth. And if it's a boy, Robert Michael." the room's silence broke into applause that echoed not just off the walls, but through generations of redemption and hope. Later, as the sun set over the hospital, Elizabeth and Michael walked to the ICU where it all began. "Do you remember, Michael said, that first sandwich I gave you?" Elizabeth laughed, a light sound full of peace. "I remember every bite. You know, Michael, in that moment, I wasn't just hungry for food. I was hungry for purpose. And you gave me both." She looked at the modern equipment humming softly, each carrying the safety protocols she helped create. The echo of a single meal, she reflected. Who could have imagined something so simple could reverberate through time, saving lives in places I'll never see, through people I'll never meet? Michael took her hand. And all because a courageous woman asked to fix something in exchange for food. And a courageous man said yes, she completed, her smile lighting the corridor as it always had, not with spotlights or fame, but with the quiet light of someone who found their purpose and had the courage to follow it. And as they left the ICU, the equipment continued its quiet work of saving lives. Each hum, each blinking light, each preserved life was an echo of that simple request that transformed the world.